Yes, hello interwebs. I'm reviewing the latest Star Trek novel to be released, the final book in the Star Trek Coda series, Oblivion'S Gate by David Mack. And if you can kind of tell by my wistful tone here, I'm actually very sad to be reviewing this book because, as I've talked about with the other two books in this series, the Coda trilogy was the kind of last hurrah for the Star Trek literary novel verse that was created after the end of Star Trek Nemesis and Star Trek Enterprise was canceled. And the novel's sort of expanding out the story of the Star Trek universe for many, many years. And expanding the story of all the Deep Space Nine characters, Voyager characters, Next Generation characters, had its own spin-offs with Titan novels and New Frontier novels, and even connecting with the Star Trek Enterprise novels that were going on at the time. And there's just huge shared continuity of books that, honestly, for me, weren't just this cool continuing story of Star Trek during a time where there wasn't much Star Trek, but also was, in many ways, my Star Trek. And allow me a little bit of indulgence reflecting upon this as we've come to the last book in this series, but I grew up with the literary verse. I caught Star Trek and got into Star Trek right when Star Trek Enterprise went off the air. I caught the last two seasons of it, and then I was so enamored with Star Trek, but I didn't have any new Star Trek to look forward to. And even when it did start to come back with, like, the J.J. Abrams movies towards the end of my high school time and going into college, they were still very sporadic. And it's only been very recently that we've gotten this new resurgence of Star Trek, which conversely destroyed the novel verse because they sort of had to reset the timeline to sort of make them fit. But during that time, the Star Trek that I had that was the thing to look forward to every single week, besides maybe like comics and such, was Star Trek novels. And I ate these things up. I remember loving the Star Trek Destiny books and all the continuity of the Deep Space Nine novels by David R. George III and all these other people. Apologies if I said his name wrong, but just the Una McCormick and Kirsten Byers' wonderful novels as well. Peter David having a few in there as well. I remember him killing Janeway. These books were just, they were my Star Trek in many ways, and it's part of why I've taken many opportunities over the years to just extol how much I love Star Trek novels. Now, certainly I love Star Trek novels outside of this literary continuity. There's many good ones that you can find out there, but I think the core of my love for Star Trek novels comes from these books. And to finally hit this last book in the Coda series, I kind of took my time with it because I was actually surprised by how much it really hit me. Because while we probably will get to see some of these characters again in canon in things like Star Trek Picard, like Riker and Seven of Nine, and Picard obviously most assuredly, and maybe like Worf and people like that possibly showing up as well, this is the last time I'll get to see these versions of the characters. What I really loved about this novel is it allowed so many of these characters to have conclusions that felt natural and felt like a true culmination of not only their characters as they've been characterized in these novels, these post-literary Star Trek novel verse, but their kind of character arcs throughout all of Star Trek, because it's quite possible that Kira Nerys, who gets a distinguished arc in this and gets to connect with her prophets in her final moments in a really wonderful way, it might be the last time we see her character. Who knows if we'll get to see her on screen again, if they're going to bring her character back. It's possible. There's a lot of Star Trek going on. But this might be it for her. And so to know that this is the conclusion of this long arc, this final ending for this character, and might be the only final ending that she gets ever, because we'll probably get novels and more stories with the character, but it'll always kind of be stuck in that stasis of being within the series, unless she gets some continuation within a modern Star Trek show. It was just nice to see those moments. And I think for the most part, this book delivered on all of those fronts. Particularly Worf, I think, was one that struck me really hard. Worf has gotten a lot of beating through the last two books in this trilogy. And in this one, I'm going to go full spoilers here. I'm just going to indulge. It's the last book in a trilogy. He gets to reunite with a mirror universe version of Kalar here. And finally, in his last moments of his life, gets to reconnect with not only his son, Alexander, who gets to finally include his arc and his connection with his father, that was sort of like a building background thing throughout all of these books, but also gets to rebuild his family with Kalar after having lost Jadzia, and even Ezri in earlier books in this series, as well as many other people that he's lost throughout his life. And so those heartwarming moments are all wonderful here. I think Data also gets I don't like his send-off here in this book more than I liked his send-off in Picard. I think it was sweeter in Picard, but his arc getting to that death certainly was, and his relationship with his newly reborn daughter Lal in this timeline, and him sort of helping her come to terms with death and dying and sacrifice in the name of something that is possibly not going to be better, possibly not going to be worse, but they don't know, but they're doing it because it's their ideal. I liked his arc getting there. And so I don't think his death was as good as Picard's in terms of its beauty in the moment, but I think his arc was really wonderful as well. And I think that kind of idea, as I sort of hinted at there, that talks about through this whole book, this idea of death and sacrifice and sacrificing yourself for an ideal is, I think, the true theme of this novel, and feels like a fitting end for this version of the Star Trek universe, because the whole idea here is that these characters know that their universe is dying. They can do nothing about that, and they're going to sacrifice everything themselves in one last ditch hurdle, like do a suicide mission in order to sacrifice everything in order to save the quote prime timeline that we see here, sacrifice themselves for the Davidians and against the Davidians. And that very much is a meta commentary on the literary verse as a whole. Even Data says, though, we don't know if we're sacrificing lives for something better. We don't know if Star Trek Picard and the prime time will be better than this literary novel verse, but you do it. You do it because that's what you're asked to do, and you have to go on faith, and you do it because it's about continuing and letting other stories and other people survive and other things survive in the name of, the ideal of Starfleet, to sacrifice for others. And I think to take that idea of the loss of this universe and make it sort of a meta commentary within the story, I think was really, really wonderful. And I think worked really, really well overall, to be quite frank with you. I think I do have some nitpicks here and there. I think my biggest ones are Benjamin Sisko. I think doesn't really get a good death here. I think it was kind of a little bit lackluster for his character, though, to be fair. Kind of fits his characterization in the literary novels overall. I have not been a fan of Sisko's arc throughout the books. I feel like he was the one character that disappointed me because they kind of like removed what was special about him and just made him like a normal everyday Star Trek captain, and kind of like ruined what made him kind of unique and special throughout these books. And the other knock that I would give this to is I do think the ending is a little bit overindulgent on Picard particularly. I understand the impetus for this novel to focus on Picard. The last eighth of the novel really focuses mostly on him. And while I get that, this is a version of Picard that we're never going to see again, and he really is kind of the linchpin of a lot of the Star Trek post-Nemesis literary books. I mean, he was very much his arc and his focus for a lot of these books. But it also is disappointing because, this is the last hurrah, and Picard is already getting his own is already having a show called Star Trek Picard and has that whole focus. So I would have much rather see a little bit more focus doled out to a few other characters. But I'm not disappointed by many of the characters' amount of time here. I just feel like, I would have liked to see a little bit more other than giving to a character who I'm going to see guaranteed more of. And is already kind of a fan favorite for many people and has already gotten a lot before this. So I was a bit frustrated by that. It's not bad by any means, and I love the idea towards the end of the novel of him cascading into his persona version of himself from Star Trek Picard, and the ending there, sort of him becoming Star Trek Picard's version of Picard, I thought kind of made this series feel like it carried weight into the shows, even though the novels will be no more. It made it feel like, these novels meant something and actually have weight in actual canon, even though they actually totally won't. And the final scene of this book, I think, is absolutely beautiful. And that I'll leave for you to find if you haven't read the book. But the last scene of this, I think, is perfect, is a perfect ending for not only literary novel verse, but also reflection on Star Trek as a whole. And the last 2 pages, an epilogue, and it's Easter eggs towards Una McCormack's novels, I should say, I thought were also really wonderful as well. So that was very, very sweet, and I really enjoyed all of that. Oh, the other thing that I do want to say too is the Borg stuff in this. They do bring back the Borg, which feels fitting for David Mack to bring back the Borg, considering he was the one that knocked the Borg off the table in Star Trek Destiny. The way they do that and have them go back to the Star Trek First Contact Borg planet that we saw for a few moments in that movie was truly creepy and absolutely scary, and it being a culmination for Picard's character felt truly great in his final confrontation with the Queen in a very, like, kind of Mass Effect 2 kind of way. Kind of fits the Suicide Mission ending of Mass Effect 2, but there's also a certain imagery that I kind of got evoked from the end of Mass Effect 2 with this sort of giant Borg Queen mirroring the, like, giant human Reaper at the end of Mass Effect 2. So I kind of had that similar imagery kind of burned into my brain at the end there. I thought that was kind of like a really cool, but also very fitting way to sort of finish out Picard here. Wesley also gets a couple cool things to do. I really liked him being sort of like spread out throughout all of time. I think was a really cool idea. I do hope they bring Wesley back to Star Trek Picard in the show, because considering that Will Wheaton is still entrenched in Star Trek doing the Ready Room and all that stuff, but we'll see if that actually happens. But I do like their fitting end for Wesley here, and him also like kind of being the linchpin of the Davidians' plans, and a cool surprise reveal I thought was really, really nice. I think the only other knock that I would give this book possibly was that it does tend to focus a little bit on Mirror Universe characters, a little bit too much, who I had a lot less investment in than anyone else. But ultimately, that's a bit of a quibble. I think at the end of the day, I think this was a truly beautiful end to the Star Trek literary novel verse. Obviously not a perfect one. There was no way it could encapsulate everything that this literary novel verse has done for over the years, but at least every single piece of the novel verse got a call out. I mean, heck, we even got a New Frontier call out here with Captain Calhoun showing up for a hot second towards near the end of this novel. So that was just a cool little Easter egg to find there. So I at least know that while it didn't tie up everything in a nice little bow, it does feel like a fitting end for this novel verse and this sort of branch of the Star Trek timeline. But I am excited to see what the Star Trek novels do going forward, whether they be like one-off sort of books exploring the backstory of various series, or they get to do more big series like this that explore different corners of the Star Trek universe. I do hope that that gets to be the case, because I will miss that if it's just like one-off novels here and there, even though I have been enjoying the Discovery and Picard novels that we've been getting. But I do hope that there's something big that they can still pull together and still do here and there. But overall, I think this was beautiful. I absolutely loved it. And I think that it is a good ending to Star Trek novels in this era of Star Trek novels. But I'd love to hear what you thought. Let me know your comments down in the comments below. Did you like Star Trek Coda, Oblivion'S Gate, and all that stuff? I'd love to hear all of that. But beyond that, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper.